Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
A widowed nurse and mother of 5, out of sheer desperation, took in a homeless old woman to look after her children while she worked double shifts. But just as Hello, dear friends. Today we bring you the story of a woman who found the strength to start a new life after a tragedy, and of a mysterious wanderer with no past who turned her fate upside down. As you listen to this story, please share in the comments where you're tuning in from. Let the geography of our hearts unfold alongside the destiny of our heroine. And now, the story begins. The October rain lashed her face and crept down her collar, turning her thin autumn jacket into a cold compress. Carmen clutched a bag of medicine to her chest like it was the most precious treasure. Elias's cough hadn't let up for 3 days, and now, as if to spite her, his fever had shot up to 39. The little pharmacy bottles, tubes, and blister packs had drained what little was left of their modest budget before payday. A damp chill hung in the air, not quite rain, not quite fog. Carmen pulled her jacket tighter, briefly noting that the stitching on the left sleeve had come undone again. That jacket still remembered last winter, and Miguel. Back then, noticing the worn-out sleeves, he had wrapped his arms around her and whispered, "Don't worry, Carmen. They promised us bonuses in the spring. We'll get you a new one, with sparkles, just like you wanted." But they never did. Her memory obligingly lit up that day, the day the world split in two, before and after. Miguel had left for the shipyard, as usual, at 6:30. And he never came back. The crane operator hadn't seen him when the boom swung around. It happened in an instant, they told her later. He didn't suffer, a hollow comfort for a widow with 5 children in her arms. Carmen blinked away the sudden dampness in her eyes, raindrops or tears, who could tell? The memories surged up, making her forget for a moment the biting reality of the autumn evening. The shipyard's cultural center, a lively amateur ensemble playing something upbeat, and in the center of the hall, there he was. Tall, a little roguish smile, a mole just above his lip. "May I have this dance?" he asked, when she shyly invited the new mechanic to a slow dance. Then came 10 years of happiness, 5 children, and a small house on the outskirts of town, where the apple tree alley had been planted by Miguel's own hands, year after year, sapling after sapling. A sharp car horn yanked Carmen back to the dreary October evening of 2015. Her smartphone buzzed in her jacket pocket, the screen cracked. Matteo's serious voice, trying to sound grown-up. "Mom, are you coming soon? Elias is crying. His fever's up again. We gave him tea with honey, like you said. I'm on my way, sweetheart. I'll be home soon. Very soon." She tried to sound calm, though her heart sank. The bus stop was swallowed by dusk. A yellowish street lamp lit up a soggy ad poster, "Cash until payday, no paperwork, no guarantors." Carmen gave a bitter smile. Flyers like these had filled their building too, like leeches ready to suck the last drop from those who were already drowning. "Clinic, last stop," the bus driver rasped without lifting his fingers from his phone. Melancholy flamenco music flowed from the speakers. During the ride, her seat neighbor was complaining on the phone about the new utility rates and the outrageous costs for building repairs. "We already live from paycheck to paycheck, and now another bill with more charges, and my daughter's wedding just around the corner, all on my pension." Carmen turned to the window, where rows of gray 5-story buildings passed one after another, indistinguishable like twins. At the clinic where she worked as a nurse, the lights were already going out. She remembered yesterday's conversation with Dr. Armando, the plump chief physician with an oily gaze. "Carmen, why all the pride? You're alone with the kids, and I can help. Daycare paperwork without waiting, sick leave when you need it. Just be a little sweeter, all right?" Remembering his clammy fingers gripping her elbow, Carmen shivered harder than she had from the damp wind. Crossing the street by the clinic had become a real ordeal ever since they'd moved the crosswalk 200 meters down, supposedly for safety, but in reality just making the detour longer. Hesitating for a moment, Carmen decided to dash across where she wasn't supposed to. Elias needed his medicine. Every minute counted. She looked around, no cars in sight, and stepped onto the road. Suddenly, a black SUV shot out from around the corner, its blinding headlights hitting her full in the eyes. She froze like a rabbit before a python, clutching the bag of medicine in both hands. At that instant, someone yanked her sharply by the sleeve, pulling her back to the sidewalk. The SUV roared past, spraying them with a wave of dirty water. The driver didn't even slow down. "My dear, why so careless? No rush is worth more than your life," came a quiet woman's voice beside her. Still trembling from the shock, Carmen turned to her rescuer. Standing before her was an elderly woman in a tattered dark coat. Gray hairs poked out from under a well-worn beret, but her posture was upright, almost regal, and her gaze was clear and penetrating. "Thank you so much," Carmen murmured. "I'm in a hurry. My son's sick, high fever." "I understand," the stranger nodded. "My name is Espironza. Where are you headed? Perhaps I can help." "You've gone pale." They made their way to the nearest bench by the bus stop. Carmen, without knowing why, told this strange woman about her troubles, Elias's illness, 10-year-old Matteo already being her little rock, the exhausting job. "And I can't find a nanny. Who'd agree to watch 5 kids for what I can afford? And in the evenings and nights, I work side jobs too. Private clinics love hiring nurses. Only now, I don't even know when I sleep." Carmen trailed off, suddenly embarrassed by her openness. Espironza listened intently, without interrupting. Her eyes held not just sympathy, but a deep, quiet understanding. "You know, as Seneca once said, there is no refuge from fate but yourself. But I believe no one should face life's trials alone." She paused. "I could help with your children, freely. I'm good with kids, I used to teach." Carmen shot her a skeptical look. Inside, her instincts twisted with conflict. On one hand, a total stranger in shabby clothes from who knows where. On the other, something in Espironza's bearing and speech marked her as educated, dignified. And those eyes looked tired, but clear and kind. "Don't worry, I'm not a scammer," Espironza smiled, as if reading her thoughts. "I'm just going through a rough patch. But that doesn't mean I can't help." A voice inside whispered, "Don't trust strangers, who knows who she really is?" But another voice, so much like Miguel's, said, "Carmen, you've always felt people with your heart. Trust it now. If you want, you can come with me. Meet the kids." The words escaped her lips almost on their own. The old 5-story apartment building greeted them with the smell of childhood. That special mix of boiled milk, wet mittens on the radiator, and something warmly, indefinably homelike. In the narrow hallway, the children swarmed around Espironza, curious, cautious, but lifted in spirits by the sight of their mother. "Mommy, did you bring Elias's medicine?" 8-year-old Natalia reached for the pharmacy bag. "I saw the car almost hit you." "I was watching from the window," 6-year-old Leon exclaimed, waving a toy dump truck. 7-year-old Daniela silently wrapped her arms around her mother's legs. Matteo peeked out from the room, slim, with thoughtful gray eyes so much like his father's. "Mom, I made a compress for Elias and warmed up the broth, like you showed me." Carmen was briefly struck by how calmly the children accepted the appearance of a complete stranger in their home. The small 2-bedroom apartment shone with cleanliness, despite its modest furnishings. Bookshelves Miguel had built with his own hands, children's drawings on the walls, a computer with a bulky monitor and towers sat on a tiny desk. Miguel had bought it for the kids a year before he died, convinced those little machines held the key to the future. "Grandma, are you staying with us for long?" Leon suddenly asked, tugging on Espironza's sleeve. Carmen opened her mouth to explain, but Espironza knelt down in front of the boy and looked him gently in the eyes. "You know what, my dear? How about I tell you a story about how Tom Thumb outsmarted a giant? Do you like stories?" The child's face lit up. Carmen noticed how Daniela and Natalia also moved closer. Even Matteo, pretending to be busy with something else, perked up his ears. But first, we need to give little Elias his medicine. Espironza glanced at Carmen. You go to your baby. We'll take care of dinner here. Later, after the medicine was given, dinner eaten, and the children, worn out from their new grandma's stories, were tucking into bed, Carmen caught herself thinking something strange. It felt as if Espironza had always been part of their family. She had so naturally and effortlessly filled the gaping void Miguel's absence had left behind. Will you stay? She asked softly, watching the elderly woman gently adjust the blanket over Elias. Espironza turned to her, and in the twilight of the room, her eyes glimmered with a certain quiet light. If you'll have me. A dull glow from the street lamp slipped through a gap in the curtains, lighting the edge of the table where a photograph lay. A smiling man with a mole above his upper lip held a baby in his arms, surrounded by 4 children and a young, fair-haired woman. Carmen lingered on the photo and, for the first time in a long while, felt that maybe, just maybe, the worst was behind them. The night shift in the hospital's emergency department was a world of its own. The corridors emptied, voices faded, and even the perpetually creaky linoleum seemed to fall silent in anticipation of morning. Carmen sat in the treatment room, mechanically laying out sterilized instruments for the next day. Her hands worked on autopilot, while her thoughts swirled around the strange visitor who had entered their lives like a messenger from another world. Espironza, where had she come from? Why them? These questions buzzed in Carmen's mind, keeping her from focusing on her work. In just 3 days, the woman had turned their worn, weary routine upside down. The house felt infused with a quiet light. The children had stopped bickering, homework got done without reminders, and little Elias was recovering faster than the pediatrician had promised. Off daydreaming again? The voice of Veronica, a nurse from the next room, pulled Carmen out of her thoughts. Careful, you'll drop something. Dr. Armando will eat you alive. Veronica, a petite woman with a short haircut and sharp eyes, had transferred from the regional hospital just a month ago. No one knew much about her, except that she was a military widow and lived with her aunt on the outskirts of town. I was just thinking, Carmen smiled. You know, we've got someone helping with the kids now. An extraordinary woman. Carmen's story about Espironza and her sudden arrival didn't spark excitement in Veronica, it stirred suspicion. Are you out of your mind? She hissed, glancing toward the door. You let a total stranger into your home. In times like these? Kids go missing, scammers are on the news every single day. Her words wrapped around Carmen's heart like cold tentacles. Who was this woman, really? What if? I check everything every night. We don't have anything valuable, Carmen began defensively. Nothing valuable? And 5 children don't count as valuable? Veronica crossed her arms. Did you even see her ID? Carmen dropped her eyes. Espironza didn't have a passport. No documents at all. I'll run a check on her, Veronica said firmly. My old colleague works in the police. Did you at least take a photo of her? The office door swung open without a knock, and Dr. Armando appeared in the doorway, a heavy-set man with thinning hair and an authoritative gaze. Carmen, come to my office. We need to discuss your schedule for next month. He gave her a calculating look and disappeared as suddenly as he had come. The chief physician's office, saturated with the scent of expensive cologne and cigarettes, always filled Carmen with unease. Dr. Armando sat behind his massive desk, idly twirling a fancy fountain pen. Sit down, Carmen, he gestured to the chair across from him. How are the kids? Must be hard, being on your own. His sympathy sounded false, like an out-of-tune piano. Carmen tensed, sensing trouble on the horizon. I'm managing, Doctor. Thank you for your concern. That's exactly what I wanted to talk about, he leaned back in his chair. About that concern. I see how much you're working, taking extra shifts. That's not sustainable. Your health will suffer. And then who'll be there for your kids? His gaze swept over her body, lingering on her chest. Carmen instinctively pulled her lab coat tighter. I could help you, Carmen. financially. Every month. Enough so you wouldn't need to take those extra shifts, more time for your children. His voice dropped lower. All I'd ask in return is a bit of special attention. We're adults, right? Inside, everything turned to ice. For years she had dodged this conversation, danced around the hints and insinuations. And now, here it was, blunt and bare. Doctor, Don't answer now, he raised a hand. Think about your kids. It's hard for them without a father, without proper support. And this? Just a few hours of your time a week, and so many problems go away. Miguel. What would Miguel say? His voice rose in her memory, quiet and resolute. Carmen, you have to believe in people, even when they let you down. Otherwise, what's the point? She remembered, too, how 4 years ago Miguel had brought home a trembling ball of fur, a dog, thrown out like trash, with a broken leg and a festering eye. We'll save him, Miguel had said. And they did. They named him Baron. He became a loyal friend to the whole family. After Miguel died, they had to give him to relatives in the countryside. A big dog and 5 kids didn't mix in a cramped 5-story building. Walking him after long shifts had been beyond what Carmen or her eldest son could handle. The children still missed Baron. I'll think about it, Carmen lied, already knowing her answer. The house greeted her with the smell of freshly baked rolls and the sound of children's laughter, a sound that had nearly vanished from these walls after Miguel's passing. Carmen froze on the threshold, unable to believe her eyes. The room was spotless. Books neatly arranged, toys sorted into boxes. On the table, a jar once filled with jam, now holding fresh flowers. Natalia and Daniela sat on the floor, intently drawing in their sketchbooks. Leon was building a tower from an old construction set, and Elias, showing no trace of recent illness, was napping on the couch, hugging a stuffed bear. Mommy! Daniela was the first to rush to her. Look what we drew. It's a constellation. Grandma Espironza told us about the Big Dipper and Orion. And we learned a poem too, added Natalia. En un lugar de la Mancha, de cuyo nombre no quiero acordarme. Espironza peeked out from the kitchen. And here comes our breadwinner. Her eyes sparkled with a youthful liveliness that seemed at odds with her gray hair. You must be hungry. Sit down, dinner's ready. Over dinner, the children excitedly shared stories from their day. It turned out Espironza had not only helped them with homework, but had also explained a difficult physics topic to Matteo, taught Natalia how to draw in perspective, and showed Daniela how to embroider with cross-stitch. And later we looked out the window at the stars, and Grandma Espironza told us about constellations and faraway countries she's been to, Matteo said with enthusiasm, his usually pensive eyes now shining. Carmen watched Espironza discreetly. Despite her worn appearance and visible fatigue, there was a natural dignity in every gesture. She quoted Lorca and Machado by heart, explained complex ideas in simple language, and spoke to each child as though they were the most important person in the world. Once the children were tucked into bed, the women remained in the kitchen with cups of tea. Outside, the October rain whispered against the window, casting an illusion of intimacy. You have a remarkable way with children, Carmen began cautiously. Did you work with them before? Espironza gazed thoughtfully out the window, as if trying to find answers to unspoken questions in the darkness beyond. You know, it's strange, but I can't say for sure. A year ago, I woke up in a hospital bed with no memory, no documents, no money. I remember only my name, and fragments of the past, like pieces of a mirror, showing parts, but never the whole. The story Espironza told sounded like a nightmare. After the hospital, she was discharged with minimal support. Social services lacked the resources. The police dismissed her as just another nameless elderly woman. Even among other homeless people, she encountered betrayal. Someone stole her few remaining belongings. Sometimes I get flashes, she rubbed her temples, as if trying to coax the memories back. A teacher's college, lecture halls full of young faces. A classroom where I talk about Lorca and Sela. And a boy, my son. He grew up surrounded by books, always fascinated by stories from the past. We'll find your family, Carmen said firmly, surprising herself with her own resolve. There's a man in our city, Simone. He's a local historian, helps search for missing people. I'll call him first thing tomorrow. They talked for a long time that evening, about literature, about parenting, about hope. To Carmen's surprise, she found herself telling Espironza things she hadn't spoken aloud in years, her fear of not managing with the kids, her longing for Miguel. Mom. Matteo's quiet voice interrupted their conversation. The boy stood in the kitchen doorway, pressing a hand to his chest. His face was whiter than chalk. It hurts here, and it's hard to breathe. Carmen jumped up, rushing to her son. Only now did she notice how pale he was, with dark shadows under his eyes and lips dry and cracked. How long has this been going on? She asked, mentally running through the symptoms of every childhood illness she knew. A week or two, Matteo admitted. I didn't want to worry you. You already have so much on your plate. Something tore inside her. Her son had been suffering in silence, just to avoid being a burden. At 10 years old, he was already a little man, carrying a weight no child should bear. We're going to the doctor tomorrow. No arguments, Carmen said firmly, hugging him close. Espironza watched silently, and in her eyes there was a mix of concern and quiet determination, as if she already knew that new trials were on the horizon and was bracing to meet them head-on. The hospital corridor seemed endless. Carmen held Matteo's damp little hand, trying to smile even though everything inside her tightened with dread. The pale green walls bore the marks of thousands of hands, worn corners showing the brick beneath, dull streaks at shoulder height, scuff marks from gurneys. Along the walls stretched endless queues of people, all with the same anxious expression. Mom, is it going to be much longer? Matteo tried to sound upbeat, but the deep circles under his eyes betrayed his exhaustion. Soon, sweetheart, Carmen lied, knowing that in hospital time, soon could stretch out like eternity in a black hole. They had already completed the preliminary exam, blood work, and ECG. Now they were waiting for an echocardiogram. The machine was the only one for the entire pediatric cardiology wing, and its schedule was booked a week in advance. Only because of her status as a healthcare worker had Carmen managed to squeeze Matteo in today. Hold this, she said, handing him a bottle of water, then began flipping through the medical chart. Several new forms with results had already been added. What she saw chilled her. Garcia, for the ultrasound, came the nurse's voice, and Carmen flinched as if struck. The ultrasound room greeted them with dim lighting and the soft hum of machinery. At the console sat an older woman with gray hair peeking out from under her surgical cap. Shirt off, lie down, she said to Matteo, flatly, with almost no inflection. Her veined hands moved deftly, guiding the probe across Matteo's chest, her eyes fixed on the screen where his small heart pulsed and fluttered. Sometimes she frowned. Sometimes she lingered on one area longer than others. Sometimes she muttered to herself, words too low to understand. I don't like that valve, she finally said, setting the probe aside. I'll show it to Dr. Zenaida. She'll decide. The next hour was a blur of being passed from one office to another, like a tennis ball. At last, they were called in to see the cardiologist. Dr. Zenaida, a heavy-set woman with a short haircut and a piercing gaze, sat behind a desk cluttered with papers. On the wall behind her hung an old anatomy chart of the heart and a brand-new calendar with a pharmaceutical company logo. History of rheumatic fever? She asked without preamble, flipping through the test results. Yes, when he was 6, Carmen nodded. A mild case. It cleared up quickly. Quickly, yes, but apparently not completely, Dr. Zenaida sighed. Your son has a serious mitral valve defect. He'll need surgery, and not in a year, or even in 6 months. The sooner, the better. The world lost its focus for a moment, as if someone had twisted the clarity knob the wrong way. Carmen felt the tips of her fingers go cold. But how? He only just started complaining. That's often the case, the cardiologist leaned forward. The defect has likely been developing quietly for years. Now the heart has started to fail. You can apply for a place in the surgical queue, but you'll have to wait several months. Then comes rehabilitation, continuous monitoring. She kept speaking about potential complications, medication costs, the need for constant care, how the boy would need to avoid stress, exhaustion, and sports. And even with state assistance, the cost of post-op recovery would be beyond anything Carmen could afford. By the time they left the hospital, it was already dusk. Matteo walked slowly, stopping often to catch his breath. "Mom, is it true my heart's broken?" he asked suddenly as they reached their building. Carmen crouched down in front of her son, gazing into his serious eyes. "Not broken, sweetheart. Just a little sick," her voice trembled, but she held it together. "But we'll make it better. The doctors will help, and everything will be all right." She stroked his hair, while inside her mind raced in panic. How? How will I pay for this? Where will I get the money? What else can I do for work? At home, they were greeted by Espironza and the other children. Dinner was already finished, the younger ones busy with their activities, but an air of tense expectation lingered. "Matteo, I found a great movie about a round-the-world yacht journey," Espironza gently touched his shoulder. "Want to watch it together?" Matteo nodded, and she led him into the room where an old computer already had YouTube open. Carmen gave her a grateful smile. Espironza seemed to know instinctively just what Matteo needed, to be distracted from hospital fears. Left alone in the kitchen, Carmen finally let her tears fall. The steel band that had tightened around her chest all day finally loosened, releasing all the tension, all the fear, all the pain. She cried silently, pressing a towel over her mouth so the children wouldn't hear. Pulling herself together, Carmen wiped her face and went to wash up. Work awaited in the morning, and decisions had to be made about the surgery, the recovery, the money. "Carmen, come to my office." Dr. Armando caught her in the hallway of the clinic before she could even change out of her coat. "I heard about your boy. My condolences." His office smelled faintly of alcohol, though it was barely past 10 a.m. He looked disheveled, with bloodshot eyes and rumpled clothes. "I can help get you a spot for the surgery," he said bluntly. "I have contacts at the regional hospital. They could do the procedure within a month." Her heart leapt, a month instead of half a year. But the feeling died as quickly as it came when Dr. Armando rose from his chair and staggered slightly as he walked to the door. The lock clicked shut. "But you understand, nothing comes for free." He stepped in too close, reeking of alcohol and cologne. "And it just so happens, my evening's free. Wife and kids are at the in-laws." His hand landed on her shoulder, then slid down toward her chest. Carmen recoiled. "Doctor, I can't." "And can your son wait 6 months with a failing heart?" He suddenly snapped, his voice full of spite. "You're a nurse. You should understand, time is working against him." Carmen pressed her back against the wall, feeling a wave of disgust and fury rise inside her. "I'll find another way," she forced out. "There is no other way," he snarled, grabbing her wrist. "Don't act like some saint. You're a young widow, don't tell me you've been living like a nun." That was the final straw. Carmen yanked her hand free and slapped him with all the strength of a desperate mother fighting for her child's life. "How dare you?" Her voice trembled, but every word rang clear. "My husband died working for me and our children. And you're nothing but scum, trading in people's health for your own gain." Dr. Armando's eyes flared with rage. "You're fired, Garcia," he spat. "Effective immediately. And forget about getting any help for your son." "I'm quitting." Carmen threw open the door. "And don't you ever mention my husband or my son again." Veronica was waiting in the hallway, gripping her phone tightly. "I recorded everything," she said quietly. "Every word. I know a journalist from an online outlet. If you want, we can." Later, Carmen shook her head. "Right now I need to figure out what to do for Matteo." They went into the supply room, where Veronica brewed a strong cup of tea. For the first time, the woman opened up, telling Carmen about her own life. Her husband, a soldier, had died in a combat zone, leaving her alone. They had no children. She had moved to this city to live with her aunt, who had passed away just a month ago. "You and I, we're sisters, fighting our own invisible war," Veronica said, hugging Carmen tightly. "Hold on. We'll figure something out." When Carmen returned home earlier than usual, empty and overwhelmed, she was met by an unexpected sight. At the kitchen table, sitting with Espironza, was Simone, the local historian she had called a few days earlier. A short, bearded man in glasses, he was animatedly explaining something while pointing to photos on a tablet screen. "Carmen, I'm so glad you're here," Simone exclaimed when he saw her. "I've got incredible news." On the tablet was a photo from a 20-year-old newspaper, an article about a citywide teaching competition. The image showed a young Espironza receiving an award from a government official. Teacher of the Year, Espironza Herrera, whose son, a student, recently won a national history competition, Simone read aloud. "That's you, isn't it?" Espironza stared at the photo, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. Her face twisted in pain, as if she were chasing a memory that kept slipping away. "Yes. I remember that ceremony," she whispered. "Ricardo won the prize for history. He loved old manuscripts. His father used to collect them." Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Espironza waited for Carmen in the kitchen. Steam curled from her cup of tea, tracing delicate patterns in the air. "Are you sure you want to go alone?" she asked softly. "Maybe I should go?" "No," Carmen sat beside her. "If he truly is your son, I need to make sure that he deserves you." She didn't say the rest aloud, that he wouldn't reject her again, that he wouldn't hurt her, that he was worthy of being found. Espironza nodded with understanding, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her knitted sweater. Morning came in a flurry of activity. Carmen gave the children instructions, counting each one off on her fingers. "Natalia, you're in charge of the flowers. Daniela, make sure Elias takes his medicine on time. Leon, no building tricks with your blocks on the floor, remember how Grandma Espironza stepped on them last time. And you, Matteo." She broke off, looking at her eldest son. Overnight, he seemed even paler. His eyes had sunk deeper into their sockets, and his lips had taken on a faint bluish tint. "I'll help Grandma Espironza," he said with quiet determination, straightening up with effort. "And I'll make sure everyone finishes their homework on time." That Grandma Espironza came so naturally from his lips that Carmen's heart tightened. Was she doing the right thing by going off in search of the woman's family, this woman who, in such a short time, had become their pillar? What if this trip shattered the fragile balance they'd managed to build? The bus to the neighboring town, 40 kilometers away, was overcrowded. Carmen squeezed into the back seat between a stout woman with heavy bags and a sullen-looking man in work overalls. The air inside smelled of wet clothing, cheap cologne, and something fried from the plastic bag the passenger in the front seat was unwrapping. Outside the window rolled a monotonous landscape, bleak fields, bare trees, a gray sky releasing a thin freezing mist, neither rain nor fog, but something in between, blurring the edges of the world. Occasionally, crooked old houses and abandoned farms flickered past, ghosts of a bygone era when these lands fed the entire region. Carmen pressed her forehead to the cold glass, watching droplets trace winding paths, merging and separating, like human lives. How many sharp turns had her own life already taken? Miguel's death, Matteo's illness, Espironza's arrival, losing her job. And now this Ricardo, was he another turning point, or a dead end? The driver switched on the radio, and raspy flamenco verses about broken love and shattered fate filled the bus. The woman beside her, the one with the bags, began humming along softly, eyes closed. "You know, after every sorrow comes a stroke of luck," she said, catching Carmen's glance. "That's what the song says. And it's true, dear. I buried 4, my husband, my little boy, and both parents. Thought I wouldn't survive. Then my granddaughter was born, and it was like the sun came up again. I'm going to her now, bringing treats." She patted her bulky bags affectionately, as if they were living things. Carmen nodded, words escaping her. She too believed that light might wait around the next corner. That belief alone made life worth living. Valdemarillo greeted her with gray apartment blocks and wide streets. The town was larger and more modern than her own. Following the address she'd written down, Carmen reached a quiet neighborhood in the city's historic district, where old mansions stood alongside sleek, modern cottages. The house she was looking for stood out among the rest. A restored red brick mansion with an attic and small towers, it was beautifully preserved. The wooden-framed windows looked like siblings of the originals, while the modern intercom at the wrought iron gate hinted the owner hadn't sacrificed 21st-century comforts. Her heart thundered as she pressed the call button. After a long pause, a deep male voice came through the speaker. "Who is it?" "Hello, I'm here to see Ricardo Herrera." Her own voice sounded unfamiliar. "It's a personal matter." Another pause. "If you're from the publishing house, make an appointment with my secretary. If it's about the museum, I sent in all the documents yesterday." Carmen drew a breath. "I'm here about your mother." Espironza. The gate opened almost instantly with a piercing creak. A tall man with dark hair tied back in a loose ponytail walked toward her along the gravel path. His face, narrow, with high cheekbones and watchful eyes, resembled Espironza's, as if her features had been redrawn by a harsher hand. "Who are you? What do you know about my mother?" he demanded, stopping just 2 steps away from Carmen. "My name is Carmen Garcia, and I believe I know where your mother is now." Ricardo's study was awe-inspiring. A 2-story room with mezzanine levels lined with bookshelves, it looked like a scene pulled from a film set in the Belle Époque. Glass display cases filled with historical artifacts lined the walls, ancient coins, manuscript fragments, clay shards. On the wall opposite the windows hung paintings in heavy frames, mostly somber landscapes and historic vistas. Modern technology blended discreetly into the decor. A computer with 3 monitors was tucked into a niche styled like an antique bureau. A media projector was disguised as a lamp, and above the desk loomed a 3D scanning unit, concealed beneath a decorative canopy. But the most striking element in the room was the photo on the desk, Espironza, 15 years younger, with proud posture and a steady gaze, looking straight into the camera, as if peering through time itself. "Sit down and tell me everything," Ricardo nodded toward the armchair by the window. From the beginning. Carmen began her story, the chance meeting in the rain, the help with the children, Espironza's slowly returning memory, and the little they'd managed to piece together with Simone's help. Ricardo listened in silence, only his crossed arms and whitened knuckles betrayed his tension. "A year ago, my mother disappeared," he said at last, once Carmen had finished. "She was supposed to go on a seaside vacation. Bought the ticket. I took her to the station, put her on the train, and never saw her again. She never arrived at the hotel. Her phone was off. I filed a police report, hired a private investigator, posted announcements, searched everywhere, nothing." He walked to the window, gazing at the falling leaves in the garden. "I always suspected my ex-fiancée, Mariana, had something to do with it. We had a stormy relationship that ended shortly before my mother disappeared. She was hurt." "What does your ex-fiancée do?" Carmen asked. "She's an antique appraiser. Works with private collections," he said bitterly. "My father was a well-known collector of rare books and manuscripts. When he died 5 years ago, I inherited both the house and the collection. That's how I met Mariana. She came to appraise several pieces." Ricardo sank into a chair. His shoulders slumped. "My father passed on more than just the house and the books. He gave me his love of history. I grew up among these volumes, learned to read old illuminated script. He used to say, 'The past holds the keys to the future.' After his death, I carried on his work, but in my own way. I created a website with a virtual exhibition of rare editions, started restoration projects. My mother always supported me. Until that day. He fell silent, lost in memory, then suddenly stood. Come. I want to show you something. They climbed a narrow staircase to the second floor, where Ricardo opened the door to a small room. Unlike the rest of the house, time here seemed to have stood still. A bed with a white embroidered coverlet, a wardrobe filled with neatly hung dresses and blouses, a table covered in framed photographs. White lace doilies everywhere, embroidered pillows, and stacks of books on the nightstand. I haven't changed a thing since that day, Ricardo said quietly. I even do the cleaning myself. I don't trust anyone else. He gently ran his hand along the spines of the books. She always loved Lorca. He understood a woman's soul, she used to say. Carmen picked up a photo album from the nightstand and opened it at random. From the yellowed page, a young Ricardo stared out, hugging a huge globe. Beside him stood a youthful Espironza and a tall man with a beard and an intelligent gaze. Your father? Yes, Ricardo smiled faintly. Ignacio. A university professor, an expert in ancient manuscripts. He met my mother when she was still a student, during a lecture on cultural history. They lived together for 30 years. He died of a heart attack right at his desk. Carmen closed the album. It was time for the most important question. Will you come with me? Will you see her? I'm coming with you. Right now. They made the return trip in Ricardo's dark blue SUV with tinted windows. Behind the wheel, he was quiet and focused, occasionally casting quick glances at Carmen, as if searching her face for answers to unspoken questions. Only after they turned onto the highway did he break the silence. Tell me about your family. Your children. Carmen gave a brief, honest account. About Miguel. His death. The 5 children. And how she had managed to survive the past year. And Matteo, he has a heart condition. Ricardo glanced over at her attentively. You mentioned his condition a few times. Mitral valve defect, Carmen replied, looking out the window. He needs surgery. Urgent and expensive. I know people at the regional clinic, Ricardo said after a pause. I might be able to help. Carmen turned to him. That's very kind of you, but it's not why I came. I only wanted to find a family for Espironza. That's all. I know, he said, smiling faintly for the first time that day, and that's exactly what makes you even more deserving of help. The car turned off onto a country road, a shortcut, Ricardo had said. The tires crunched over fallen leaves, and branches tapped at the windows like impatient fingers. There's something I should tell you about Mariana, Ricardo said suddenly, slowing the car, so you understand what we might be walking into. The story he told was both banal and terrifying. A driven woman from an impoverished but well-bred family. A passionate affair with a wealthy collector. Wedding plans, and then a shocking discovery. The bride was secretly appraising his collection to sell it overseas. My mother warned me, Ricardo admitted bitterly. Said Mariana was too interested in my books and not enough in me. She insisted that if I ever married, I must have a prenuptial agreement. I didn't listen. Thought she was just being possessive. Then I stumbled upon Mariana's emails with a foreign dealer. There was a huge fight. I threw her out of the house. A week later, my mother disappeared. You think Mariana had something to do with Espironza's disappearance? I'm sure of it. But I have no proof. He gripped the steering wheel tighter. Her alibi was solid. The police cleared her. But I know it was her. By evening, they reached the city. The autumn day was fading into twilight. Streetlights flickered on, their reflections pooling in puddles like little stars. Right here, on the corner, Carmen pointed toward the 5-story apartment block. Ricardo parked the car, turned off the engine, and sat motionless for a few seconds before exhaling sharply. I'm afraid. Those 2 words, spoken without bravado and with disarming honesty, suddenly made him seem closer, more human. Carmen gently touched his hand. Come on. She's waiting. Espironza was sitting in the armchair when they entered. Her hands, folded in her lap, trembled slightly, but her posture remained straight, her gaze clear. The children clung to her like chicks to a perch, sensing the gravity of the moment. "Mama," Ricardo's voice cracked and broke. Espironza slowly stood. Her eyes, fixed on her son, filled with tears. "Ricardo, my boy." They rushed toward each other like two halves of a whole that had been separated too long. Ricardo embraced her gently, as if afraid she might vanish in his arms. Carmen quietly ushered the children into the kitchen, giving mother and son a moment alone. But only minutes later, Espironza's voice rang out in a sharp cry. "Carmen, come quickly." Rushing into the room, Carmen saw Espironza clutching her son's arm, eyes wide and fixed on something only she could see. "I remember," her voice trembled, filled with both horror and relief. "I remember how that woman told her accomplices, make sure she never comes back." Mariana. It was Mariana. Outside, the rain lashed against the windows, as if nature itself was echoing the drama inside. Espironza, exhausted by the surge of memory, sank back against the pillow. Ricardo held her hand tightly, his face white as chalk. Her memories returned in fragments, like torn pieces of paper someone was trying to piece together with shaking hands. First, disjointed images, a train station, light rain, the conductor's voice. Then sounds, the clatter of wheels, muffled voices beyond the cabin door, the rustle of pages in the book she'd been reading before sleep. And finally, faces. There were 3 of them. Espironza's voice was quiet but firm. She now sat at the kitchen table, gripping a cup of long-cool tea. Ricardo was taking notes, occasionally asking gentle, clarifying questions. One was the train conductor who brought me tea. There was something in it. A sedative, I think. I remember waking up at some remote station, alone in an empty carriage. They were dragging me to a car. Mariana stood nearby, giving instructions. No traces, no way to link anything to me. Her son watched her with pain and tenderness, afraid to interrupt the fragile stream of memories. Then the road, long. They kept me in some kind of basement. I remember the smell of mold and the cold. Mariana came twice. The second time, I heard her say, "Make sure she never comes back." That's when I realized they meant to kill me. Her fingers tightened around the teacup, as if clinging to the present moment. They took me out at night. I think they wanted to stage an accident, maybe throw me off a cliff or drown me. But on the way, the car crashed. I was thrown from it and landed in a ditch. I woke up in a district hospital. No memory, no ID. Ricardo stood, gently took the cup from her hands, and wrapped her in a firm embrace. "We'll find them, Mama. I promise." He walked over to the window, took out his phone, typed a short message, waited for a reply, and nodded to himself. "My friend Andres is a major crimes investigator," Ricardo explained, turning to Carmen. "We're opening an official investigation." At that moment, a strange sound came from the room where the children were sleeping, a half-sob, half-moan. Carmen leapt to her feet, flung the door open, and saw Matteo sitting up in bed. His face was contorted in pain. His lips had taken on a frightening bluish hue. "Mom, I feel awful," he whispered. "It's like something squeezing in my chest, and I can't breathe." The night turned into an endless nightmare. The ambulance, the emergency room of the district hospital. The on-call cardiologist delivered the diagnosis with grim clarity. Acute heart failure due to a progressing valve defect. He needs to be transferred to the cardiac center immediately. Carmen felt like a grain of sand sucked into the vortex of catastrophe. She stood by her son's bed, watching as nurses connected him to monitors, her fingers trembling uncontrollably, as if someone had switched off all her emotions and left only numbness and the surreal sense that none of this could be real. "Carmen." Ricardo's voice pulled her back to the present. "I'm calling a contact at the regional cardiac center. Dr. Herrera is a leading cardiac surgeon. He has connections in federal clinics. We'll arrange Matteo's transfer as soon as his condition is stabilized. She turned to him with vacant eyes. But the wait list, the money? You helped my mother, he said, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. Now it's my turn to help your family. And this isn't about money. It's about saving your son's life. The regional cardiac center was worlds apart from the district hospital, bright corridors, modern equipment, staff in immaculate uniforms. But to Carmen, none of it mattered. All she saw was Matteo's face resting on a white hospital pillow. Dr. Herrera, a short, lean man with an intense gaze beneath thick eyebrows, spent a long time reviewing the test results and consulting with colleagues. We can include Matteo in a research program for minimally invasive valve surgery in pediatric patients, he said at last. This would allow us to operate within the next few days and provide full post-op care. But you must understand, the procedure is complex. There are risks. Carmen signed the documents with mechanical movements, as though watching her own hand from the outside, scrawling her name on pages full of medical jargon. Consent for surgery. Consent to participate in the study. Informed consent for a blood transfusion if needed. Each signature felt like both a sentence and a prayer. The days leading up to the operation blurred into a single stretch of anxious waiting. Espironza spent every permitted moment with Matteo. She brought books, read aloud to him, told him enchanting stories, as if her words alone could keep him anchored in this world. You know, Matteo, she said one day, sitting beside his bed, many years ago, I made up a story for my students about a boy with a weak heart who dreamed of becoming a ship captain. The doctors told him he couldn't sail, but he loved ships so much, believed in his dream so fiercely, that his heart grew stronger each day. And one day, he really did become the captain of a great ship and sailed all around the world. Matteo listened, spellbound. His tired eyes shone with a feverish glow. I'll be a brave captain too, Grandma Espironza, he whispered, clutching her hand. I promise. Carmen didn't sleep a minute the night before the surgery. She sat by her son's bed, listening to his breathing, to the beeping of the monitors, to the rustling in the hospital corridor beyond the door. She remembered Matteo's first smile, his first steps, his childish handwriting in school notebooks, the orange blossoms tangled in his hair after walking through the orchard at their country house. Her entire world had shrunk to this room, to this fragile body lying in a hospital bed. In the morning, Matteo was wheeled away to surgery. Carmen, Espironza, and Ricardo remained in the corridor, sentenced to agonizing waiting. The clock on the wall seemed to slow its ticking, mocking their impatience. The surgery will last at least 4 hours, Ricardo said softly. Let's go to the cafe. Get some tea. But Carmen couldn't move. She sat clutching the edge of the bench, counting her own heartbeats, as if each one could somehow keep her son's heart beating behind the doors of the operating room. Ricardo sat beside her. For several minutes, they said nothing, each lost in their own thoughts. I never thought I could care this much about a boy I've only known for a few days, he finally said. But Matteo, there's so much life in him, so much will. He's like his father, Carmen's voice trembled, just as stubborn, just as determined. Miguel used to say, he'll make a fine sailor one day. They built model ships together. She trailed off, swallowing the lump in her throat. Ricardo gently placed his hand over hers. Matteo will pull through. I believe in him. During the surgery, Ricardo stepped away several times to take calls, updating Carmen briefly each time on the investigation. They found surveillance footage from the train station. They've tracked one of the abductors. An arrest warrant for Mariana is being prepared. But none of it registered for Carmen. It was as if her mind had tuned out the rest of the world. Only when Dr. Herrera appeared in the corridor did she stir, staring into his tired face like it held the fate of her own. The surgery was successful, the surgeon announced, removing his cap. We performed a valve repair and placed a supporting ring. Matteo is in recovery now, and the prognosis is good. Carmen didn't remember collapsing. Her knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, face in her hands. But these were not tears of despair, They were a flood of relief breaking through the dam of her composure. Matteo's recovery days coincided with the resolution of Espironza's story. The investigator uncovered irrefutable evidence of Mariana's involvement in the abduction, surveillance footage of her speaking with suspicious individuals on the train platform, emails exchanged with one of the attackers, witness statements. Mariana was arrested at her office, a striking woman with cold eyes and flawless makeup, too stunned to resist. Ricardo was present at the interrogation when Mariana began to confess. She didn't show remorse so much as justification, rambling from one topic to another, as if trying to reconstruct her fractured self-image. "You don't understand," she told the investigator, nervously adjusting her hair. "My family once owned an estate, a painting collection. It all vanished in the 90s. My father couldn't handle it, he drank himself to death. My mother died of an illness we couldn't afford to treat. I swore I'd take back everything that was rightfully ours." Ricardo listened from behind the glass, feeling not hatred, but an odd emptiness. The woman he had once loved had become a stranger, her face twisted by greed. After Mariana signed the confession, Espironza unexpectedly asked to see her. Ricardo was firmly against it, but his mother insisted. The meeting in the detention center lasted less than 15 minutes. No one knew what was said between the two women. But when Espironza emerged, her face bore no triumph, only deep, quiet sorrow. "Money and possessions can be returned," she told her son, "but a soul lost in the chase for them, never." Matteo recovered faster than the doctors had predicted. Just a day after surgery, he was transferred from the ICU to a regular room, bright, spacious, and equipped with the latest technology. Ricardo had made sure the boy received the best care and all the necessary medications. Color returned to Matteo's face, and a gleam of curiosity shone once more in his eyes. A light blush returned to his cheeks. He devoured the books Espironza brought, and peppered Ricardo with questions about old manuscripts and maps. One day, when they were alone, Matteo asked quietly, "Can I see the books and maps you digitized for your website? Especially the ones about sailors and explorers?" Ricardo smiled. In this boy with serious eyes, he saw a reflection of his younger self, the same hunger for knowledge, the same determination. "Of course, Matteo. I'll show you everything I have. You know, my father once owned a rare map of Magellan's expedition with the captain's own handwritten notes and diaries from explorers like Elcano, Vasco da Gama, Cortez. When you're feeling stronger, we'll study them together." The boy's eyes lit up with such wonder that Ricardo couldn't help but reach out and ruffle his hair, a gesture that came from somewhere deep within, surprising even himself. "Will we really get to see them?" Matteo asked, a little shy at the touch, but not pulling away. "Me and Mom, and Leon, and the girls, and Elias?" "Of course," Ricardo nodded. "All of you. Together." That night, driving home from the hospital, Ricardo thought about the strange chain of events that had led him here. How his mother's disappearance, the worst moment of his life, had somehow led to the most unexpected gift. Not only the return of Espironza, but the arrival of people who had become suddenly and deeply dear to him, the delicate yet strong Carmen, the thoughtful Matteo, the noisy whirlwind of younger children. For the first time in a long while, Ricardo felt that his house, filled with books and history, yet so empty this past year, could be filled with life again. And the feeling was like what a lost traveler feels after wandering in darkness and finally seeing the light of a distant lighthouse. The April sun poured over the historic streets of Valdemorillo, awakening trees that had only recently stood silent and bare. The first hints of green shimmered on the branches like a timid promise, and the air rang with birdsong. In that freshness, there was something reassuring, as if nature itself confirmed that winter had finally given way. Carmen stood at the open window on the second floor of the old manor, watching Ricardo give the children an impromptu lesson in the garden. He was showing them how to determine a tree's age. Leon had climbed onto Ricardo's shoulders to get a better view. Natalia was diligently sketching in her notebook, while Daniela and Elias excitedly counted rings aloud, constantly interrupting one another. 6 months. Just 6 months had passed since that damp October evening when Espironza entered their lives. And yet it felt like an entire era. Carmen ran her fingers over the new smartphone Ricardo had given her and tapped the record button, wanting to preserve the moment. She had mastered the technology by now. She had to, after getting hired as a nurse at the private clinic Neovita. Everything there was digital, from procedure logs to the appointment system. The job turned out to be not only well paid but also respectful. They valued professionalism and didn't tolerate favoritism. "Spying on us again?" came Espironza's voice from behind. She had entered silently, holding a tablet. "I've prepared the content for tomorrow's blog post." Ricardo promised to help edit. Espironza had changed. She looked younger, more composed, her silver hair neatly styled. Her memory had fully returned, and with it came a quiet inner strength. She now ran a popular literary blog where she shared teaching strategies and reflections developed over decades of experience. Remarkably, in an age of short attention spans, her thoughtful and measured approach to literature had resonated with many young teachers. "I'm not spying, I'm admiring," Carmen smiled. "I still can't get used to how well Ricardo gets along with the kids." Miguel was a factory man. He never had the patience for those kinds of explanations. Mentioning Miguel no longer brought pain, rather a gentle sadness, like an old scar that aches with a change in weather but no longer bleeds. His memory lived in a special place in her heart, untouched, yet no longer holding her back from moving forward. Back in February, once the children had settled into the new home, Ricardo had suggested creating a digital photo album in Miguel's memory. Together, they scanned old photographs, recorded memories, and collected video stories from those who had known him. "So the children will never forget their father," Ricardo had said. He, raised with a reverence for history, understood better than most the importance of preserving memory. "Carmen, do you think we're doing the right thing?" Espironza suddenly asked, setting her tablet aside. "You, me, Ricardo, the kids, all of us together?" There was so much meaning packed into that question that Carmen didn't answer right away. She recalled a recent encounter at the shopping mall where she'd taken the kids over the weekend. Amid the glittering displays and bustling crowd, she had quite literally bumped into Dr. Armando. He looked older, worn out, his eyes dimmed. "Carmen," he had said, attempting a weak smile. "How are you? How are the kids? I heard Matteo had the surgery. I'm very sorry for our misunderstanding. Maybe we could grab a coffee, talk?" Carmen had looked at him not with hatred, but with a quiet surprise at her own calm. "No, doctor. I have coffee with friends. Not with people who try to use someone else's desperation for their own benefit. Goodbye." And she had walked away, holding Daniela and Elias by the hand, feeling his gaze behind her, not angry, just pitiful. A week later, Veronica told her that after the article was published online, several more nurses came forward with harassment complaints, and Dr. Armando was removed from his position. "Sometimes life delivers justice on its own," Veronica had written in a message. "You know, Espironza," Carmen finally replied, returning to her question, "there was a moment when I thought my life was over. That there would be no more joy, no light. Just dragging myself through each day for the kids, on the edge of exhaustion. But then you appeared, and then Ricardo, and suddenly I saw the world was wider, kinder than I'd believed. That help could come from strangers, and salvation from a chance encounter. I think that's the answer." Espironza nodded in silence. This woman had endured so much, the loss of memory, betrayal. But she had held on to her ability to believe in good. And that faith had been rewarded, as if life itself had recognized her endurance. From downstairs came a joyful cry from Matteo. "Mom! Mom, look what we found!" He stood on the garden path, waving a shiny object in the air. His cheeks were flushed, and a mischievous sparkle danced in his eyes. No trace remained of his recent illness. The operation had been a success, and the doctor said that with proper care, he could live a full life. There was treasure buried here. A real coin, an old one. Ricardo says it's over 100 years old. Matteo had changed over the past 6 months, grown more mature, more thoughtful, but he hadn't lost his boyish wonder. Thanks to Ricardo, he had developed a passion for history, especially maritime exploration. He'd even started his own video blog about ships and explorers. Shy and unpolished, yes, but with such enthusiasm that he had already gathered a small group of fellow adventure-loving followers. "I'm coming," Carmen called, smiling. At the bottom of the stairs, Ricardo was waiting for her, holding a garden trowel caked in dirt and beaming with a quiet, unmistakable happiness. "We were digging out a new flower bed, and Leon found the coin," Ricardo explained. "Now the kids are convinced the house sits on buried pirate treasure. I'm afraid the whole garden's going to be dug up." Their eyes met, and Carmen felt a familiar warmth bloom somewhere beneath her chest. Their relationship had grown slowly, cautiously, as though both were afraid to scare off this unexpected happiness. No confessions, no declarations, just a deepening trust each day, a quiet certainty that they would be accepted, understood. "You're worried about your flower beds?" She laughed. "About the kids," Ricardo replied gently. "I don't want them to be disappointed when they realize it's just an old copper coin, not a doubloon from the Black Pearl." That evening, after the little ones were asleep, the three of them walked down to the river not far from the house: Ricardo, Carmen, and Matteo, who had been given special permission to stay up late. The boy brought with him a small model sailboat he had once made with Miguel. "I want to set it afloat," Matteo said, gently stroking the carved edges. "Let it sail." His voice was a mix of resolve and hesitation, as though he were letting go of something important, unsure whether it was the right thing to do. Ricardo crouched beside him, looking into his eyes. "This ship sails as a memory of your father, a memory no one can take from you," he said softly. "Even when the ship disappears around the bend, the memory stays with you. Understand?" Matteo nodded, then carefully placed the sailboat in Ricardo's hands. "Will you help me?" Together, they lowered the boat onto the water. The current caught it, spun it gently, then carried it away toward the setting sun, which turned the river's surface to gold. Matteo watched it go, and his eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow, but of something lighter, purifying. "Goodbye, Dad," he whispered. "I'll never forget you." Carmen hugged her son tightly, not hiding her own tears. And when Ricardo wrapped his arms around them both, she knew the time had come to make the decision she'd been putting off for weeks. 2 months earlier, Ricardo had asked them to move in permanently. "This house is far too big for one historian and his books," he'd said. The children had been thrilled by the idea of living in a real-life museum, but Carmen had hesitated, afraid of losing her independence, afraid it would somehow betray Miguel's memory. Independence isn't about living alone. It's about choosing with your heart, not out of fear or convenience, Espironza had told her. And Ricardo hadn't pushed. "History teaches us that the strongest foundations are built slowly," he'd said, with the kind of quiet kindness that had awakened in her a long-buried sense of safety. And now, watching the boat disappear beyond the river's bend, Carmen knew it was time for a new journey. Miguel would not have wanted her to stay alone on the shore, afraid to board a new ship. "Yes," she said softly, turning to Ricardo. "We'll move in. For good." That fall, when the maples in the garden turned crimson and gold, the old manor house was filled with life. Everyone gathered around the large dining table. Family dinner had become a tradition, every Friday, no exceptions, to reflect on the week, share news, and simply be together. Espironza read aloud from her old poems, recently rediscovered in a digital archive. Heartfelt verses about home, about the homeland, about timeless values untouched by passing years. Matteo proudly presented his latest video project about ships, now more professional, featuring archival footage Ricardo had helped him find. Natalia had pinned her drawings to the walls, watercolor landscapes and portraits of her family, startlingly accurate for her age. Daniela, who had recently discovered her musical talent, hummed a song she'd learned in the school choir. Leon and Elias were roughhousing under the table but quickly quieted under Espironza's stern glance. Carmen looked at them, her children, Espironza, who had become a true mother to them and to her, and Ricardo, whose hand now rested gently on her shoulder, and thought about how strangely life unfolds. How new happiness can grow out of tragedy, how a new home can be built upon the ruins of the old, stronger, steadier than before. She remembered that October evening, the night she'd almost been hit by a car, when a stranger in a worn coat pulled her back at the crosswalk. Coincidence? Fate? It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that she'd had the courage to accept help, to let new people into her life, to believe that even after the darkest night, dawn does come. Matteo caught her gaze across the table and smiled, openly, brightly, just like Miguel used to. And that smile was her whole life, past and future, everything worth fighting for, everything worth moving forward for. Outside, the autumn rain whispered against the windows, just as it had a year ago. But now, it wasn't a hostile chill, it was a gentle reminder of the warmth of home. Happiness sometimes comes on its own, in the most unexpected ways. The most important thing is to be able to accept it, Carmen thought, looking at her new family. To be able to open the door when fate knocks, even if sometimes that knock sounds like the pounding of a storm.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.